Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of The Pivot. I'm Shane Keel, your host. I'm with Tony Frega and Jaime Gleason from DD Agency. So the nature of this show, we're trying to address real-time challenges that enrollment marketers are facing, admissions teams are facing. And basically we're going to start off with, where's the team at now? It's February, going into March, and a lot of people are thinking about their all programs open houses or their bigger event. And so I think starting there and thinking about what happens if you're running an event, and before the show, we were actually just connecting about this very same topic. You're, structuring this event, and then all the admissions people essentially say, we're too busy, we can't make it. Here's the faculty, make do. Where do you even start with something like that, given faculty are not known for necessarily running events? And so it puts you in a little bit of a tough spot. But you are where you are. How do you solve it?
Well, okay, I'm just going to point out the elephant in the room and say, why are the admissions folks too busy? Let's just go there first. We aren't going to solve that one. That's obviously not the pivot, but I think for an institution, that's the first question that you have to answer and the first thing you have to solve for. That's a big, big problem.
And you still got to do it.
And you still got to do it. You're right.
And the original thing, just to be fair, the original pivot was you're doing this big open house event and only 3 out of 6 faculty members can be there.
Yeah.
But you got to talk about multiple programs and all about the school. What do you do? And then I threw out I literally just this week had a client who was like, no one from admissions can do this event. So faculty are rolling up their sleeves saying, we see that enrollment's so bad, we don't want our programs to die. We'll show up. Yeah. And that's great.
That's
Thanks.
Huge. Yeah.
But marketing is kind of like, I'm not sure they know how to talk about admissions, enrollment related things.
Yeah.
They're not used to talking to prospective students. They've never done one of these.
Sure.
Love the eagerness. What the heck do you do?
Yeah.
I think both such scenarios need different responses, different pivots.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of folks in enrollment marketing who are facing this.
Yeah, I mean, when I was the director of admissions, I never wanted faculty just to straight up be exclusive with students for too long of a time, and especially
why not?
Well, if we think, let's hold on a second. I'll get to that in a moment. But when we think about the spring, one of the things that you're dealing with most of the time for most institutions on the undergraduate levels, you have a lot of juniors who are attending open house for the first time. So the last thing that you want them to do is to have an extended exposure with a faculty member who only wants to talk about their program and how awesome it is, because it's like going on a date with someone and before you know it, you're talking about the size of the family that you're going to have together. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. That's way too fast. And I'm not ready for that yet, because most students aren't ready for that. Now, there might be the exception to that rule, but I think the key is you have to figure out, what faculty members are the ones that you want to connect with the students. So do you have access to every faculty member potentially? And how can you get the rock star faculty members in there, but not have them necessarily be the spokespeople for admissions? How do they, what I'd rather do is say, what's something you're great at? Is it a lesson plan? Is it talking about this, internship? Is it this outcome? Get that person to a spot where they're speaking about their expertise rather than speaking into an area where they don't have a lot to offer, aka the admission sales pitch.
Yeah. I think that's fair, and I think you have to break out. I think where it's safe and fine for the faculty to really go all out about how much they love their program, which I think when you get a faculty member really being passionate about what they teach, that's the very thing that can attract a lot of students. But the challenge on an open house, generally, those are, you have a variety of students, and how do you get them there? The best ones I've seen, and what I would do in that situation, even if I had no admissions folks, I already know what I'd do for that. I would go get the best student, the best couple students, to be the general ambassador to do. You need someone, and this probably has to be a faculty member, but you have to have that faculty member do the intro that speaks about the school, about the institution, and just bleeds, why we're different and all the core values and stuff like that. But once you pick someone to be almost like MC, you can let those individual program faculty do their thing, but you pair them up with a student And I would almost intentionally, you could pair them up with a student in their program or not on purpose so that they don't have to be, that you don't let them totally go into it. Or then you have breakout sessions so that they do that. If you can do breakouts in your open house, then you let prospects self-select going to the sub-school or the program area of study that they're more interested in. This works more on a grad level necessarily than undergrad, but it can still work on undergrad if you're a large institution with a lot of schools.
Sure.
But again, the problem is they can get really academic and they're not often answering the questions that a prospective student is thinking about. And that's where I think the student ambassador, I don't care what I would need to pay them. I don't care what incentive I would have to do.
Yep.
But I would pick my best students and say, hey, we will pay you. We will give you an incentive to do this. But we have this open house and we're short staffed and we need you to be like a promoter for our school and think about what it was like when you were picking a school and just talk about why you picked this institution. And so you get this, you train the students how you want, they become your admissions reps and you pair them up with each faculty person. And that's what I would do.
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about too, real quick, is the breakout sessions and kind of like the rotating, almost speed dating style of an event eliminates the I'm gonna hold on to this student for 2 hours and just tell them everything about my program, because you have to rotate. And ideally, you're talking to multiple students at a time, where it's a little less like a student has an out if they want to leave the conversation, rather than feeling like they're attached to this faculty member at the hip now because they feel too uncomfortable to walk away or be like, you know what, I am not interested in your program and never was. So if you're thinking about, the non-admission side, not showing up, what about with limited faculty? Admissions is there, but limited faculty members where now you get almost none of, and it's very select. It's 3. So it might not even be the 3 programs that you think like, oh, these are the sexy ones that we can, it might be your 3 worst programs. It could be I can say this maybe because I'm a communications graduate, but it's a communications, faculty member that's like, what are you going to tell me that's going to sound all that interesting and different from other schools? And so how do you kind of work with 3 faculty members for 3 programs that, might not be the best? And now you need to somehow make your institution sound more interesting while also providing that level of granularity to show difference that's different from just that kind of an initial intro kickoff and MC that you were talking about before, Tony.
Yeah. Yeah. So one way that I've actually seen this actually in real time work out is we'll make believe we have 3 faculty members. And I think sometimes we fall into this trap of thinking we know all the questions that the people are going to ask. So we try to answer them in advance of them, which is not altogether a bad idea. But sometimes we actually might be putting questions out there that they actually aren't going to ask anyway. So what I have actually seen done before is to build a panel using those 3 faculty members, but throwing in someone from athletics, throwing in someone from student life, and make it so that there's an option, a plethora of situations that are represented, and then open it up. Have the students, the parents who are with them, ask the questions. My head also goes into the pre-building, right? How do we build this schedule so that way any of the gaps that we're afraid of are kind of filled up, using video, using really dynamic student speakers and announcers, and maybe bring in an alum who can speak to their recent experience, and peppering the event with all these different kind of multimedia types, so that you're reducing the need to have, putting a huge burden on these 3 faculty members to basically own the whole thing. But, you're given an opportunity to help them shine where they can shine and answer questions that are real questions that people ask. I love the panel. I feel like it's always engaging and interactive. People love almost having this unscripted experience where someone's shooting back at them and saying, oh yeah, this is how I've dealt with that in the past in real time. I think it works well every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question in this scenario, I just thinking through it, is it 3 faculty from 3 random programs? They're maybe not even the biggest ones, but is this multiple schools at an institution? It's a really broad open house, or is this more smaller?
Yeah, I think an open house at a smaller school that maybe has 4 or 5 schools within a graduate school or something. And you're getting, one of their business school faculty members, one of their nursing school faculty members and one of their
maybe a
let's say,
communications
like a film and
professor.
media, or a communications professor that can, where you're really spread out and you don't even know, right? There are a bunch of faculty within that school alone, but you're kind of getting like three really hodgepodgey. They might not even know each other at all and might not have chemistry. And smaller pivot within, right? You have a panel, and they're kind of asking general questions. Who's tackling some of those more general questions when you have three specialized faculty members, and kind of handling some of those things.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, it's so institution specific, but I feel like there's got to be someone who can be your generalist on the panel. There's got to be
a promoter, a general promoter.
Or someone who's just maybe a poli-sci faculty member who's really good at just pivoting and not answering the question in general. maybe that could be
Talking in
maybe that
circles.
could work.
Yeah.
I think this gets to a huge thing I hear all the time though. And I think this is hard. I don't want to diminish it's easy, just do this or get this.
Yeah.
Every idea I've ever had about, well, can you get? Often the answer I get from schools, from clients we worked with is like, they're agreeing with me with their eyes, but in their head, they're saying, I can't get him. I can't get her. It's too hard. So the concern is the logistics. It's just so much planning. And sometimes you're just lucky to get those three, even though you wanted more. And that's the problem with an open house is, again, as you said, we don't always know what to expect. And so I think you have to cut off something. And the thing you have to cut off in this pivot, if I had an open house that was originally planned, where I got one representative from each college or each school, and it was all perfect, and then it got cut, and I couldn't get as many, I would change the agenda.
Yeah. 100%.
I think you either have an agenda that goes from general and allows people to break in, or you let go of that and you take those three and you do the panel or whatever, but you condense it so that it's not this smorgasbord of we are an open buffet, all you can eat. It's not. You have to control the narrative more, and you turn those three into they're just representative of. They're representative of the kind of faculty you're going to get. So you have to change the expectations that open house is not necessarily going to answer all of your questions. I think you have to let go of that in favor of a stronger program. And so you're headlining a stronger program. You lost your cover band, but okay, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to make it as best you can. And so, but there is one role you must have. I don't even care. It's either one of those faculty or it's not. Somebody has to be that generalist. Someone has to be the all things kind of, that's what I call the MC, is they can handle those kind of questions that those faculty couldn't or something like that, or do a really good job of kind of dodging it with a nice little answer. But you have to have someone emceeing.
Yeah. And what do you think, let's say you brought up a point earlier about trying to get faculty there and kind of thinking they won't do it or they don't want to, or they'll reluctantly come, but they kind of won't really be helpful, or they'll have a negative attitude about it. And that will then show up to prospective students and then they'll feel negative about it. How would you go about, let's say you're on an admissions team, you're trying to incentivize in the same way that you mentioned a stipend for students to come. How would you get or incentivize faculty to come? Maybe that's something that you either can offer them directly, or who do you need to go to? And this is probably an age-old question, how do you then go to somebody above them and say, hey, your enrollment sucks. You need to
that's
have,
gotta come from the
have a
top.
hand in this. And what are they saying to the faculty that really put a little bit of the onus on them for enrollment? And I think instead of the mindset of I'll just show up and teach and I'm doing my job and I have a great program, it's now on marketing and admissions to fill it. There's nothing more I can do.
Yeah, that is an age-old question, 100%. Yeah, and I feel like every institution, and this has always been my experience as a former director of admissions, there are always institutions where there are people who are amazing at open houses, faculty members who are absolute rock stars, and most of the time they're the ones who are willing. So, in this scenario, my imagination says these people that are able to come are actually the rock stars, which makes this scenario a much easier pivot because you know that they're reliable. You know they can speak well on off the cuff. They are able to kind of answer some of the questions that people will most likely have. But incentivizing them is really hard. And again, my experience is that it's mostly an intrinsic motivation that gets people to say, oh, you know what? Like, this is me getting in on the ground level, and being able to manipulate what people are interested in majoring in. So you'll have a lot of times, for undergraduate open houses, students, especially here in the spring, they're going to be interested in coming, but they're not necessarily 100% wedded to a program already.
Mm-hmm. So you understand you might not have every faculty member there. That is not that expectation.
Yeah,
right?
That's totally in us. Yeah, we're it's internal. That's inside baseball speaking right there.
I feel for undergrad, you're spot on, JB. I feel for undergrad, honestly, though, guys, it's a little easier. Because undergrad open houses tend not to have this problem because it's such an important thing. No one messes with that. Second, if so-and-so can't come, there's undergrad, the open houses are more representative of, and they're broader, and the expectation is that faculty are there to represent faculty, but a good program has a little bit of faculty, a little bit of existing student, a little bit of administration and leadership, financial aid's there, admissions there, and even alum. Like, you get a little bit of everything, so every kind of prospect they're not expecting more than that. I think this is much harder in the adult market and the grad market, where you have, and where I've seen this is particularly for a couple years ago, a small-ish, medium-sized private institution had this situation where the admissions, this is why I brought this up before the show, the admissions team was just like, we are understaffed. We cannot do events. And I came in as, analyzing what they were doing in their whole enrollment marketing strategy. And I'm like, oh, obvious big gap. You guys aren't really doing enough recruitment events. You guys should be doing these program-specific events. And they're like, we can't do it. And it was odd because often it's the admissions teams that are able to do it. Mm-hmm. I'm speaking to the Jamie, who's the director of admissions, and I'm now trying to talk to you about who you can get. I've never spoke to the Jamie, director of admissions, who's like, yeah, we can't do that. But I knew they needed to do it. And so that had to come, Shane, from the leadership. The provost had to say, enrollment is so down. Hey, this guy's saying we need to do events. We haven't done events in 2 years. Yeah. Who can do it? And the faculty were being held. They were told from the top, you have to help with enrollment in some way because otherwise we won't be able to fill your program. Right. And so faculty had a coal put under their butt. And they said, we'll show up. We'll do it. And then we were now having faculty doing these kinds of events. So this was grad and kind of adult degree completion. So it was a little different, and it was not a large public institution. So I think the larger you are, honestly, the harder it is for someone in enrollment or even Marcom to tell faculty that they have to do anything because they don't. And so that's where I think these pivots do hit a wall. It's easier for the smaller, medium-sized schools where the leadership is like, we have to all be all in on this. Faculty, we need your help. And they're like, sure, show me what I need to do. I'll show up.
Yeah. And I think, you can correct me if you don't think this is fair, but I think undergrad is a little bit more of a feel-good generalist experience anyway at the open house. Like, again, you're undecided on your major, most likely, and you're kind of just there to get a general sense for the school. Whereas for
selling culture,
school, there's maybe way less pressure to go to graduate school. You need a better sense of ROI of going. You have, direct competitors that you're competing with, some pretty high profile alum potentially or great faculty members, whatever. There's a lot more. You're dealing with a mature audience that's asking better questions. So like the panel at the undergrad level is probably pretty easy compared to the panel at the graduate level. And so thinking through, those two things, how do you kind of customize your, let's stick with a panel idea, panel to be a little bit more, speaking to the actual audience you're dealing with. So I think it's easy to say, make a panel and have people answer questions and have a generalist. But how do you almost prep the people on the panel to make sure you don't get put in an awkward situation where they're asking a question that, you don't have the poli-sci guy up there to, do loops and circles and backflips to avoid a question. And maybe this is, again, leaning a little bit more on the grad side of things, but I think that's the one area where, you could get some people asking some really good questions that you'd rather answer one-on-one and be able to think about over email than answer live in front of a group of 50 people.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a fair point. I think one of the advantages, though, I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that super easy in the undergrad market.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of times graduate has a decentralized enrollment model where faculty members do play a little bit more of a hands-on role in the admissions process, and they can guide students a little bit more clearly. But that being, all things being equal, I think you have to like almost give like a bullet point list of people on your panel and say, hey, these are the areas, like almost like your UVPs of like, these are the things that we want to like help land, help talk about like really solid outcomes, really low, like, cost comparison numbers, things like that. But maybe you don't want to go into the details, the real big weeds of them. Is like helping faculty member to speak clearly, having timers, that's another way to kind of save yourself. If you're like, hey, you know what, like we got like a certain amount of time that we can handle on these certain questions, and like if you have more questions about it, like catch me afterward and we'll go into more detail. I feel like that could be an easier way to like make sure that you're not like going down a rabbit hole, because we all know faculty members that can go down a rabbit hole and hog the mic and that kind of thing. So you want to avoid that for sure.
Yeah,
that's bad form.
Yeah. So thinking about the user experience and tying that into the agenda of the event, I'm curious your guys' thoughts on how to structure an event so that there aren't maybe lulls and gaps from a prospect's point of view. So a couple random ones that come to mind of, you have these different breakout sessions. None of them particularly appeal to me. So what's built in kind of for me when I don't care about these 3-4 other things? Or we're hosting this panel. Great. Sometimes, depending on the group that's there, nobody wants to ask the first question, and so you get a little bit of that awkward silence. What gets built in to kind of make sure that things flow smoothly and that you have something for everybody without, again, having 50 people on staff to be able to tend to every little need? What do you kind of bake into the agenda or bake into each session to make sure that you're kind of covering the needs and wants of any particular prospect?
Man, this is getting hard now. I feel like we're really having to think. I think...
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I think, again, it just keeps coming back to the program and the agenda you've put together. It's impossible to always build these events so that you're going to handle everything. And I think the antidote to that is to make sure that what you have put together is enough and is exciting enough, and you don't let people kind of like go their own way too much. And honestly, literally, food is actually a really good filler here, because where you put the food in the schedule and feeding people is a great way to kind of be that filler. So yeah, you could have the 3 people up on the panel, or you could have this breakout part, but there's always going to be the students who are like, that's not me, or what do I do? So yeah, I mean, you need to have a catch-all for that. But at the end of the day, what you put together is what you have. You almost do kind of need to force people into it. Well, this would be the best thing you should go to.
Yeah.
And so I just want to go away from it's already a lot of work to plan this. There's already I'm already dealing in this situation, and it's less than ideal. And if we tell ourselves, whether you're more on the marketing side or on enrollment management, hosting this, whatever it is, I think we need to take the pressure off and say, you don't have to design the perfect event.
Yeah.
It's enough just to do an event, and you are doing the best you can with what you've got. And whatever holes you do have, inevitably you're going to have some prospects that don't fit all the categories. The goal isn't actually to make a bucket for every single kind of person who could come, or even to answer every question. The goal is just engagement with your brand and to get a really good interpersonal communication experience out of that.
Yeah.
So even if you don't have the perfect thing or person for them, what you want out of that engagement is just to understand what they need, and then to be like, hey, this might not be the place for that, but I can connect you with who that would be. That's Dr. So-and-so. They couldn't be here today, but I can put you in touch with them. And that ultimately, at the end of the day, if I go to the open house as a prospect and I don't get every one of my questions answered, but I got some questions answered and pointed in the right direction, I think I'm leaving happy. And that's the goal of the event. And so I love your question, but I don't want to really go into more detail on it, because I don't want to scare everyone into like, you have to have this all perfectly laid out to do these events. No, I've learned over the years, it's better that you have a less than ideal event than don't do the event at all. The schools doing events are getting better engagement than the schools that are wussing out because they don't have the perfect cast for their event. The show must go on. That's the pivot. The pivot is make do with what you got. Who cares that you can't fill every idea or question or kind of prospect who's going to be there.
Yeah.
No, to summarize what you're saying. So you would put way more stock in an organized event with key players rather than a strict schedule agenda of every 15 minutes are blocked off for particular things. Here's exactly where everyone's going to be at this exact time. More in favor of the, hey, let's just get the best players in the room. Let's have a rough, loose structure, and then let's kind of fire by the hip, because you have people that are great at one-on-one communication. You have people that are great that are, showing student experiences in a small setting, and you don't need 75 sessions in one single day to show off everything that your school has to offer.
Yeah, totally.
3 really good sessions is better than 17 but you're stretched and you don't really have the people for it.
Yeah. You don't want them to leave stressed out and thinking, oh, I missed a whole bunch, or that was just too rushed. I do love the option of having like some kind of enduring events throughout. So if you have 3 planned sessions, maybe you've got a student tour guide that every 20 minutes or so they leave on a tour that's going to be applicable to the type of student that you have, like showing off the library, showing off, the student commuter lounge or something like that. And like really kind of building in that like experience element of like, hey, this is what it's going to look like. And the other thing that I always love, obviously this maybe depends a little bit on the where students are in the pipeline, but having an opportunity for them to fill out the application while they're there. So if they don't identify with a particular session, that they can sit down at a computer, bang out the application. It gets you an application. Maybe you have an incentive with them filling it out when they're on site and helping them to see like, oh yeah, this process is fast. It's easy. I can get it all done today. I can leave with a cool sweatshirt because they gave me a 50% off coupon or something like that. I really like that as an incentive. As for someone who maybe doesn't identify, the one thing I would say is don't make the alternative or the enduring events more attractive than the actual open house thing, because then they'll be like, oh well, screw that. I'm going to go out and like look at the campus or something because I don't feel like listening to that dude.
Yeah. That's a good segue into like putting a bow on the event, right? You have your closing session. You have you want that call to action at the end of what you want people to do, give them the necessary information so they can make an informed decision, but they have everything at their fingertips. So they don't need to scramble later and be like, what did they say about financial aid or starting my application, or what was the benefit? How long did I have to do for that?
Sure.
So what do you feel like is a good, again, kind of either closing session, handout stuff at the end, swag, whatever it might be? Like, how do you kind of wrap up? You went through all the work of this event, but if you kind of flop the last impression, they're left with a bad taste in their mouth. How do you make sure that goes really well? And what does that really look like when, again, you have to be so general to all programs and all things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a huge area where the flavor of the school has to fit like the bow, right? Like if you're talking about a big, state school and we have several hundred people who are going to be at this all programs open house, like that's going to be somewhat different. But I think the things that we have to make sure that we're living in is there's got to be a good after like post event communication flow that feels like it's just for me, right? It can't be just like, thanks for coming. Here's your survey. Hope you had a good time. We'll be in touch. It's got to, and absolutely, if someone takes the time to visit your campus, there's no way that they should be leaving without some sort of swag. Like, that is like a complete no-no for them to leave and not become a potential marketer for your programs by wearing a t-shirt, by having a tote bag, whatever you give away. It's like they should leave it with that. And they should also, I think, a very clear and kind of announced closing. One of the things that has always kind of made me very upset about some events is like when they fizzle out. It's like there's not really like a grand, like a final congregating of the people, and then it's like, okay, it's over. It's more like, oh, after this event's over, you just kind of go back to your car, and it's like people are kind of like just walking all over aimlessly. I think there's got to be like a closing ceremony, so to speak. If you can get a heavy hitter, a dean or a provost,
something inspirational,
something to speak them out, I think is way, way better to do than to let it fizzle.
Remember when we worked on that Newman, that NU promotional video?
Yeah.
That was the inspirational piece. And there was 2 components. One was this B-roll that played in the background all the time that just looked really cool. But there was this actual closing 5-minute video that was incredibly inspirational. And I think either a video that's really inspiring or a speaker who's really inspiring. But again, in this pivot, in this situation, we're having less than ideal speakers. So let's say you don't have that. I would still settle for something that closes.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing I'd add on is, I think the goal, like I'm thinking here, like, how do we know if this was successful? Are we measuring the success of this open house by how many RSVPs and then how many showed? Often we look at events, and we're talking with clients all the time. It's like, how many people showed up? What was the show rate? Oh, we had over 50%. Yay, right? That's actually not the goal, though, believe it or not. The bigger metric, the other KPIs would be, I would say, whatever, if they haven't started an app, getting them to start an app, and if they've started an app, getting them to complete an app.
Yeah.
Those are the two big wins. An open house should generate a bunch more app starts. For most schools, this is going to only apply, this is most schools, I think, but where you have an app account and you set up the account, don't expect them to do the whole thing. I think that's way too much friction, way too overwhelming, except for some smaller schools where the app process is really simple. But other than that, if they haven't started an app, they're an inquiry or just a prospect, this is their first event, and they haven't started their application account, just getting Tony to have started his account with his basic contact info, you can let your post-app start marketing do the rest.
Yeah.
I trust that. And so I got Johnny Prospect, who didn't start an app, to start an app. That's a win. And if he had already started an app, then it's, hey, for those of you who started, but you haven't finished, we've got people from the admissions team, ideally, present here to answer your questions, getting them to complete the app. So whatever stage they're at, getting them to do that next action stage, that to me is really the purpose of the open house. And it should be measured by how many folks came and did that action. That's closing it out. Like, make sure you don't leave. If you haven't started, make sure you at least start your account. Don't have to do the whole application today, but just start it. And likewise, if you start it but haven't completed, don't leave without getting your question answered. There's somebody here who wants to answer your question because they're shy and they don't, you have to encourage that.
Yeah. And I think that goes into looping back to the beginning of structuring your event. You want to structure it in a way that meets the goals that you have set out. If the goal is to get, this number of prospects to start versus this many to finish, and structuring sessions to help enable that, structuring, as you were saying, Jamie, kind of the lasting session that's kind of always there. There's always somebody at the table to help you finish your application or get it started, and having those available to people and thinking about that prior to and not after the fact of the event, being like, well, how many people did this thing? And it's like, well, we didn't really ask anyone to do that thing. So that's not even a fair thing to measure against. And making sure that that's really woven into your strategy is obviously super important.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts on structuring an event? What would be most helpful? Anything we didn't discuss that you think is a need to know for people?
One of the things I would say, and I think that this probably goes in these little waves, but if you think about the open house in general, obviously a lot of schools put this as a huge determinant of future action. Like, if you can get someone to show up on campus, that's a big friggin' deal. Yeah. What I would encourage, and I think that the industry is probably ripe for this, is like thinking about alternative mechanisms to get people on campus. And obviously, being on campus is a very important thing, but like, what does it look like to have open house events that are not on your campus, that are actually with your people? And really, like, this is a bigger, grander pivot, but like, how do we set up some metrics that move these events so that they're more user friendly? Because maybe the investment of time is too significant. Maybe part of their coursework is going to be hybrid, so coming to campus all the time isn't as big of a sell. Or maybe it's online. So like, how do we think about events differently? And I think that's one of those areas where I think higher ed probably should be thinking more and more. And I do see smatterings of this, in different places where they're doing these kind of regional, let's meet up at a Starbucks, or let's use a hotel lobby and do something where we're bringing the show to them. I just think there's some powerful opportunity there. And we certainly live in a market where the consumers, who we're calling future students, are almost demanding us being a little bit more flexible. As a person who's not change averse, I love the idea of thinking and trying out different things. It doesn't make the logistics any easier in most cases, but it does change the expectation of what this has to look like. And I think that that's where higher ed maybe needs to start thinking of hey, maybe it doesn't have to be a 3-hour event. Maybe it can be a 45-minute event where we have one faculty member and one admissions person. And instead of 200 people, we get 25 quality people, and the conversations are amazing.
Yeah. That's called an information session.
Well, maybe.
Awesome.
No, that's right.
Awesome.
I like it.
I think
Smaller,
that's-
more doable events.
Yeah.
That's plenty on events and structuring your event. Next session or next episode, we will go into marketing an event. Twist is to come. Can't give you any spoilers, otherwise you can prep. So we hope to see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you very much for listening. This was episode 1 of The Pivot, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
We need to have some
All right.
clever sign off, like now you get to go pivot.
Oh, yeah. Boom. Yeah.
There you go. You just
That
made
works.
it. Stop.
We just did it.